Hello, my name's Georgia Maram and I'm the Deep Learning Consultant for the Association of Independent Schools New South Wales. AIS New South Wales has been partnering with NPDL since 2018 and we have 30 schools involved in our network across New South Wales. This presentation is about how we deepen learning to spark curiosity and action in our students. This is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's why we're here, and it's why over 2,000 schools across 12 countries have joined the NPDL network. Research tells us that typically 40% of students in any classroom are passively disengaged. That means they aren't misbehaving, but they are also not actively listening, participating, or interested in what they're learning. Traditional ways of teaching are not working with our new generation learners. Teacher-driven methods where teachers do all the heavy lifting in the classroom and our students sit passively and listen does not allow our learners to exercise the skills they need to thrive in our disruptive and uncertain world. We need new ways to capture the attention of our students in the classroom. So how is deep learning different, and what are the hallmarks of learning that can spark more enthusiasm in the classroom? I love to use this table with teachers, particularly when they're new to the work. On the left are traditional methods of teaching and on the right are deep. It's good to look at each row on a continuum and think about your own practice. For example, for the first row, we can ask ourselves, to what extent are my lessons teacher-driven or student-led and teacher-framed? To what extent do I transmit knowledge or information to students or connect students to real-world authentic problems or issues? How well do I build new relationships between and among students? To what extent are my students receiving knowledge rather than inquiring into or building knowledge? How well do I connect learning meaningfully to student interest or voice, or connect with others to do good? And finally, how do I design learning using technology to connect and amplify learning rather than just transmit? And so we have to have our students in mind when we design. We have to know our students well, their interests, their needs, and our strengths. Deep learning inherently has the students at the centre of our design. Remember, the purpose of designing deep learning is to firstly lift engagement for our students, and only then will they be in a position to develop the global competencies. The beauty of the NPDL work is that it gives us the tools and the processes to do this. For example, the learning design planning template that you see on your screen here. It's a fabulous tool that guides teachers through the design process so that no step is missed. It helps us ask all the right questions and guides us to consider things in a certain order. I've designed with over 30 collaborative inquiry teams in the past 3 years, and we use this planning design template to keep our discussions focused, robust, and forward-moving. Notice that the first question in the assess phase is, what are the students' knowledge, skills, interests, and needs? Once we understand the purpose of designing, which is to lift engagement and develop those competencies, we can then design with precision. The 4 learning design elements of the NPDL framework holds all the ingredients or design choices that teachers can make that will ensure they deepen the learning for students. The learning design rubric is the powerhouse tool. It's the jewel in the crown. It is fantastic to use in the measure, reflect, change phase of the inquiry cycle, or when teachers are very familiar with the learning design elements. But the tool I love to use with design teams when they are first learning this work is the cues and prompts tool. I want to take a laser sharp focus on the design element of pedagogical practices from this tool. And when I work with teams, there are 3 must-dos that I know will lift engagement, spark curiosity, and put students in charge and in an action-oriented mindset when they're learning. These three must-dos are the three first ones in pedagogical practices. The first one is learning opportunity. We need to create learning opportunities that are authentic and based on real-world issues for our students. The second one that I'm going to focus on today is putting students in charge of the learning, this idea of teacher-framed and student-led. And the third one that we'll talk a little bit about is learning that reflects the needs, the interests, and the abilities of our students. So these three high-impact choices as our first must-dos when we're designing learning and deepening learning for the first time is what I'm going to focus on for the rest of this presentation. I'd like to specifically look at how to form strong driving questions that set the stage for the entire learning experience. And secondly, show you a great tool we use from Wiggins and McTighe called GRASP's task that frames the learning for students to lead. So let's look at driving questions. They are fantastic for setting a clear purpose for the learning from beginning to end. When constructed well, it is the prompt teachers can use all the way through the learning to get students reflecting, staying on track, and working towards the performance task at the end. The driving question set at the beginning of the unit of work is the question that students will be answering at the end of the unit of work. The link between the driving question at the beginning and what the students and how they demonstrate their learning at the end cannot be broken. It's important that they are one and the same. Once we set that driving question at the beginning and design the performance task at the end for the students to answer, then we can start to design the learning experiences that will ensure students are successful in that performance task. So how do we form a driving question? We need to start with the curriculum, with the content. What do we want our students to learn about? Let's look at 4 examples. Here we have 4 different areas of curriculum and content. The first one is in the subject area of health and physical education, and the content that we want students to learn about is healthy eating. You can imagine this content will want students to engage with the 5 food groups: proteins, carbohydrates, dairy foods, fats. It will also want them to ask, what should we be eating more of? What should we be eating less of? And proportions that might be good for us. But instead of transmitting this knowledge to students in a teacher-directed way, imagine if we pose the driving question of, why does it matter what food we eat? If we frame the learning from beginning to end with this question, and students can present their thoughts about why it matters in a way that suits their needs, abilities, or creativity, then it becomes far more purposeful and relevant to them. Let's take one step further on this. What if they were able to take a perspective when answering that question? The perspective of a pregnant woman, an athlete preparing for the Olympics, or their baby brother. Then this becomes even more authentic with interests and choices woven in. A hallmark of a great deep learning task is that not all students' answers or performances will be identical. Imagine what we can all learn from each other about healthy eating if we took on different perspectives. Let's look at the arts, major forms of modern art. Take that content on symbolism, cubism, expressionism, and constructivism, and create a driving question such as, how can we create a gallery exhibition that explains the history of modern art? In this way, as an art gallery curator, we take on a real person for a real purpose for others. When we position the driving question into a work or career context, it becomes far more real and purposeful for students. They will still need to learn about all of the modern forms of art to achieve this task, but it will be far more engaging. And again, no 2 student presentations will be the same. Let's look at a mathematics example in the area of statistics. That driving question could be something like, how can we, as managers of a national basketball team, select the best players to win a championship? Now, we know this is going to appeal to a lot of students. Again, real world, students lead their learning by researching their favourite teams. They have to use statistics to support their answer. No two student performances or presentations will be the same, and it could lead to some students asking if they could actually choose a different sport based on their interests and being fanatical about that sport. In these circumstances, when students reach out to us and ask, Miss, Sir, can I do this? Do you mind if I study this? Do you mind if I present on this? We need to find ways to say yes. If the content and the outcomes are still being covered, it's great to affirm their curiosity, their initiative, and say, yes, you sure can. I like this last science example as well, landforms and tectonic plates, because the driving question poses an investigation of this science content within your local area. Why are there so many hills and valleys around here? Which is another way to make content relevant and purposeful to students. So, how might you apply these ideas to creating a driving question to a unit coming up for you? How can you turn the content into an authentic and relatable driving question that can trigger curiosity and active learning in your students? The second idea I'd like to share with you that teachers find helpful is the frame from Wiggins and McTighe called the grasped task. You can see an example of one on the page there in the top corner. It's just an A4 page that sets out the expectations and what you'd like students to achieve in the final performance task. What's the goal? What role will you take on? Who is your audience? What's the situation? What will you need to create, develop, or share in the performance? And what are the success criteria by which you'll be marked? Let's have a look at an example of a grasped task and go back to the mathematics statistics driving question that we looked at earlier. How can we, as managers of a national basketball team, select the best players to win a championship? The concept around this really is about using statistics and good information to make decisions. The way we could pose a task for students around this is setting it out in this way, in a grasp form. The goal becomes draft the best team possible from the National Basketball League based on player statistics in the last 3 years so that they can be invited to represent their country at the World Championships. The role students take on is as manager of the national basketball team, and the audience that we might present to them are board members of the National Basketball Association. Now, whilst they may not truly be board members of the National Basketball Association, even better if, the students know the audience and they pitch their language and the sophistication of their presentation to that audience, whether it be real or imaginary. The situation is important to outline, and the performance is important to give the students this idea of what are you asking them to do and what choices do they have around it. So they can present their player statistics, strengths and positions in any way that they think might have the biggest impact on the board. But you're asking them to include statistics and the justifications around that. An important thing to note is the standards at the bottom. I really encourage teachers to include not only the content success criteria, but also the competency success criteria. In this case, it's collaboration. So I've included some marking criteria around what I'm looking for that will tell me the level you're operating at within collaboration skills. So once we have these 3 must-dos in place, formed a driving question, set our performance task that meets the interests and the needs of our students, then we're free as a design team to make additional design choices. So what additional design choices could this collaborative inquiry team have made for the mathematics unit? A great way to look at this is on the NPDL placemat, and we take one at a time. If we look at pedagogical practices, the types of choices they could make that would enhance and deepen the learning could be to co-construct success criteria with students and enhance student voice. They could look at building scaffolds for supporting students to interpret statistics, and they could get students to regularly use the learning progressions for collaboration as a self-assessment tool to make sure that students are valuing the skills of collaboration throughout the unit. For learning partnerships, wouldn't it be great if they could actually get a real life sports association board member, somebody to come in and talk about what it's actually like to compile a representative team and all of the considerations that go into forming representative teams. In this way, when we bring in external partners, it elevates the authenticity and purpose behind the unit of work and lifts engagement for our students. What they could do for learning environments is concentrate on the classroom climate and really taking a focused effort to set clear expectations around the C that they're concentrating on. In this case, it's collaboration, and asking students in their group, really looking for you to take risks and be courageous with the work that you put together. And we're really looking for you to listen respectfully to each other in your groups. It could be many other things, but they're just two examples. For leveraging digital with this particular unit, some choices are around the need for students to represent their statistics in a graphical way. So infographics are a great way to represent statistics and pictorial information. So introducing them to the world of Canva and Pictochart would be great ways to leverage digital to enhance and deepen the learning, as well as using platforms that support collaboration and communication, like Google Docs, Google Drive, and Microsoft Teams. So they're just some choices some additional choices that teams can make when they're designing the learning experiences for students. So these are the high impact steps to deepening the learning. Remember, these are just the first three that I recommend and I do with my design teams. Connecting students to something that is really interesting and relevant to them, real world authentic problems. Framing the learning so that they can lead it. Remember, we want them to be doing the heavy lifting, not us. In this way, they can actually exercise the skills and the competencies. And another hallmark that's really important is where the final performances are not all the same. They are slightly different because every student has different interests, needs, and abilities, and it's really great to honour that. Give some of these ideas a go for your next learning unit and look for the difference in the energy and the enjoyment and depth of learning you'll see in your students. They'll love it, and so will you. Thank you.